Hey guys, welcome to another re-release from my overlong going back video that I released a few years back. This one is related to my video essay on the Outrigger Chase and its original follow-up. I will now splice in that section of relevant video, but please do stay tuned because after that I do have a video recommendation for you guys regarding this topic, as well as an update regarding when the next Smoke and Mirrors entries will be released. Okay, so the next comment that I want to get into was in response to my follow-up video on the Outrigger Chase. Now, some important things to know before going into this exchange is that in my original Outrigger video, I shared my belief that the answer that makes the most sense as far as who was shooting at the time travelers from the Outrigger, I believe that that was Ilana's group, and that this occurred during the season 5 finale when they were in the process of trying to reach the four-toed statue before the others did so that they could prevent the man in black from deceiving them as Locke into getting Jacob killed, essentially. I also detailed how the second Outrigger, the one that the time travelers take, I believe that was the one that was already present in that camp. The one that Carl had brought over at the end of season 3. The one Desmond and Charlie take out to the looking glass. And the one that we see Bernard and Jen use to fish in the middle of season 4. In that original video, I did also give each of the Outriggers a name so that it would be easier to refer to each of them as I was tracking each one throughout the back half of the series. The conversation I'm about to get into does refer to these Outriggers by these names, so I do think it's best if I quickly try and recap what those are and which ones they each refer to. The one that Ilana's group uses to bring the crate over from Hydra Island, and the one that we see pursuing the time travelers, I refer to that one as the cargo ship. The one that the time travelers take, which I believe is the one that Carl had brought over, I refer to that one as the original Outrigger. As for the remaining two, these are the ones that Sun and Lapidus come over in, and then the Man in Black with Ben comes over in. I call those Sunbeam and Et to Ben, respectively. And the last bit of context I want to give before getting into this is that in my follow-up video, I addressed the alternative theory that the people shooting at the time travelers were actually some of Widmore's people who are present on the island and traveling back and forth from Hydra to the main island throughout season 6. In that follow-up, I kind of detailed some of the many reasons that I prefer the interpretation that it was Ilana and her group instead of Widmore's people. And so that is what this user is responding to. They actually bring up quite a few interesting counterpoints to explain why they favor the Widmore's people interpretation. That user is ferromagnetic, and they say, I would like to provide some evidence that I feel supports the theory that it was most likely Widmore's group in the Outriggers, and that it couldn't have been Ilana and her group. Now, most of the time when I address these comments, I read everything that I'm going to read from their comments, and then I address it all. But because ferromagnetic actually lists a number of points worth addressing, I'm going to take them one at a time, starting with Locke, Sawyer, and possibly Juliet all would have recognized the original Outrigger as the one the Losties acquired in Season 3. But they don't correct Miles or otherwise act like the boat is familiar to them. So this part I found interesting to think about because the person that they name that they seem to find the least likely to have recognized the Outrigger is Juliet. And I actually think she's the only one out of the 3 named people that stood a real chance of recognizing it. And that's because Locke actually was never present at the beach camp from the time that the outrigger arrived until the point where he returns to the beach camp while they're time traveling. So he had actually never seen any of the outriggers before at this point. Because when Carl brings it over, Locke is near death in a ditch. And then from there, he goes, he kills Naomi, and then he meets up with the survivors again near the cockpit of the plane, at which point he takes half of the people to the barracks. And from there, he goes to the cabin, to the Orchid, to the others' camp, at which point he starts time traveling. So at no point is he present on the beach with that outrigger. And when it comes to Sawyer, he's not much better. He is there when Carl brings the outrigger over, but shortly after that, Desmond and Charlie leave with it to go to the Looking Glass. Then Sawyer leaves with most of the camp to go to the radio tower. Him and Juliet come back and deal with the others there. And then they are there when Desmond brings the outrigger back and Charlie's not with him. Almost immediately after that, Sawyer leaves with everyone else to go and warn Jack's group about the freighter people not being who Naomi said they were. And once Sawyer leaves with them, he ends up going with Locke to the barracks, and he also doesn't return to the beach camp until the point at which the time traveling starts. And of course, once the time traveling has started, the objects that were part of the camp are no longer there. So even when he returns to the camp with Juliet and they start time traveling, the outrigger isn't present anymore because they are now time traveling. And so while Sawyer did spend a little bit of time in the beach camp while the outrigger was present, it certainly wasn't enough time to associate that as a part of the beach camp. And that lastly brings us to Juliet, who is present at the beach camp for pretty much the entirety of season 4, during which time the outrigger is also present. So she actually did spend a few days in the camp with the outrigger being there. So if anyone stood a good chance of recognizing it, it would be her, and maybe Faraday and Charlotte, who spent a little less time than her in season 4 at the beach camp. But the reason I think it's perfectly plausible for no one to have recognized this as being that same outrigger is because of it being located next to this second one, which has 2 structures and is completely alien to them. Not to mention that this original outrigger has the Ajira water bottle on it. So it's natural for them to assume that these both arrived at the same time from this mysterious group that brought the water bottle. As for why the 2 outriggers were next to each other in my scenario of Ilana's group only using the cargo ship, as well as why the Ajira water bottle would have ended up in that original outrigger, I did talk about that briefly in my original outrigger video. To really oversimplify what I said there, basically I think one of the reasons her group came ashore at the beach camp is because they saw that other outrigger, knowing that the man in black, in the form of Locke, came to the main island in an outrigger, and so did Sun, one of the potential candidates they need to protect. So I think one of the reasons they came ashore at the beach camp was to investigate this outrigger. And I think before going into the jungle to investigate further, they had put both outriggers next to each other. And in the process of doing that, one of them set their water bottle in that other outrigger. Like I said, that's a very quick, oversimplified explanation for that. If you visually compare this outrigger, the one the time travelers take, with the original outrigger, it's very clear they are different boats. I don't have screenshots handy, but you should be able to see this from the clips you use in your original video and screenshots on Lostpedia. The original outrigger has sharp white tips on the bow and stern, white tips on the float,
and a cross brace running between the two float supports. The one Sawyer's group takes has a different shaped bow and stern, a curved black float, and no crossbar. So admittedly, I've really only looked at the clips I've used in my videos on the Outriggers, and I do kind of struggle to see some of the differences they're talking about, particularly regarding the bow and stern. I have not gone through the effort of finding screenshots or taking screenshots and comparing them. So while it is not super evident to me that these are not meant to portray the same Outrigger, I will give Ferromagnetic the benefit of the doubt that they have looked into this more than I have, and I'm sure they're not just imagining these differences. So conceding that they are correct about that, here is why such differences would not convince me personally to surrender my interpretation of the Outrigger Chase. If you look at the four-toed statue that we see at the end of Season 2, and compare it to the one that we see in Seasons 5 and 6, it is noticeably different. If you look at the imploded aftermath of the Swan Station at different points in Seasons 3, 5, and 6, it looks drastically altered. And if you look at the hatch door and its surroundings in Season 1 versus Season 2, they've changed inexplicably. Now, are we forced to conclude that there is more than one four-toed statue on the island? Are we meant to believe that the survivors at various points are coming across the rubble of many different structures that they keep mistaking for the Swan? And are we mistaken for not concluding that there are actually multiple hatch doors that access the Swan Station? I think the vast majority of people would agree that the answer to each of these questions is no. These are just 3 examples, but the fact is that any film or TV show, especially a TV show that lasts multiple seasons and requires many sets and props to be remade, this is always going to mean that the continuity is never going to be 100% perfect. And it is for that reason that the Outrigger we see in Season 5 not being a perfect match to the one we see in Seasons 3 and 4 does not convince me that it is not that Outrigger being depicted, or that it cannot be interpreted to be that Outrigger being depicted. Now, am I saying that Ferromagnetic or anyone else is wrong for looking at these differences and concluding that they are different Outriggers? Absolutely not. In fact, I find the logic there to be completely and undeniably sound. I am merely sharing why I personally do not feel forced to share in that conclusion. Ultimately, this back and forth that Ferromagnetic and I had is a great example of one of those conversations where we each still have opposing views on what we think happened, and yet the conversation in and of itself was quite rewarding. And in the end, we both respected each other's perspectives without having to agree or see eye to eye. So a couple months ago, Choekaas, who I often reference on this channel, released his own video on this topic once he got to the episode where we see the Outrigger Chase in Season 5. And in that video, he not only does a fantastic job recapping the various Outrigger theories that are out there, but he also puts forth one that I had never come across before and one that had never occurred to me.
One that I now honestly believe is probably the one that the showrunners and Jorge Garcia, who plays Hurley, have referred to as having been scripted during the course of season 6, but for whatever reason didn't end up getting filmed and put into the show. Now, originally I was wanting to kind of tell you guys about this theory that Choekaas puts forth and then give you my thoughts on it. But in order to do that, I would really have to summarize his perspective, and that would risk me misrepresenting or inadequately capturing his thoughts on it. Or, with his permission, I could have spliced in that section of his video, and that way you guys could have heard it in his own words. But then that might have stolen from him potential views. So instead, what I'm going to do is link his video up here and in the description below. And if you guys are then curious as to my thoughts on it, I did leave a comment on that video back when it came out. So you guys can look in his comment section and find that if you are so inclined. And the last thing before ending this, I did want to let you guys know that next week, barring a death or serious injury, you will finally be seeing the next part of my Smoke and Mirrors video essay. And the way things currently stand, you should be getting part 6 the week after that. At which point there will only be one remaining section to that video essay to be released. I may or may not be able to release part 7 the week after part 6. If I'm not able to do that, then you will see at least one more of these in between those parts. As of this video, I believe I'm just more than halfway through re-releasing the sections of that video that I plan on re-releasing. But that's everything for today. I hope you guys will come back for the next one.
Oh, you're still here. Hopefully that means you enjoyed this video. If so, please consider sticking around and being a constant for this channel by clicking right up here to subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon if you would like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive. In the meantime, feel free to check out previous content from this channel by clicking here or here. Oh no. Please subscribe.